all the grown-ups are insane. I'm 27 now, so I'm a grown-up, right? I consider myself a grown-up. When I was much younger, I would look up to adults and think, oh, these guys know what they're doing. They always know the right answers. They're so wise. They, whenever I have a problem, I fall, I hurt my knee, or I get in a dispute with somebody, they always know what to do, and they did, right? So you assume that there's this point where you change from being this youth into being an adult who knows all this stuff. They know, what's right, what's virtuous, what's moral. They have the answers. So, I was only considering it really over the last few years, but just really thinking, wow, I just coming to terms with the fact you're a grown up now. You're 27, you're a grown up, right? So, so what I would strive for, and this is, particularly the last few years, I would strive to become a better adult, a better grown up, because my assumption is when you're an adult, you should know what to do, right? So you study out stuff, you study out virtue, morality, ethics, and of course, the more practical stuff like how to fix stuff, how to, budget, how to pay bills, all that kind of stuff. That's obvious stuff. Everybody does that. But what I found most startling was that as I spent all my time studying these ethics, studying morality, studying virtue, what is it that makes something good? What is it that makes something evil? Why is something bad when someone does it? Why is something good when someone does it? How can you universalize it so that you can call people out on it, right? And say, well, that's bad, here's why, and be able to explain it. So, I have my head down studying this stuff, logic and reason. And then when I come to opportunities to present it or to apply it in my life with other people, because that's really where it matters. Okay, you can read any book in the world, and then it doesn't matter unless you're going to live it, unless you're actually going to do it, because otherwise you're doing a great disservice, right? So like if you pick up somebody's diet book and you're 400 pounds or 500 pounds, and you say, yeah, I've been reading this book for 2 years, this diet plan, the person who wrote that book is not going to want you saying you read that book, because you're not living it. You're doing a great disservice. It's not that it's even neutral, like you're actually doing a bad thing. So in order for the principles to have any kind of weight, any kind of importance, you have to live it. So I live it, right? But what I find is whenever I'm in contact with pretty much every other adult, every other grown-up, everybody over the age of whatever, 18 or 20 or 20, whatever you determine, and upwards, people who really should have a handle on this stuff, none of them have taken the time to study this stuff out. So what I've come to understand is that most grown-ups, I would say all grown-ups with some exceptions, right? So just to keep it as simple as possible, all grown-ups, with some exceptions, only mimic, or they pretend they're very good at assimilating behavior into their own character. They don't have any abstract principle why they should do something. They just do it to survive. So they've learned how to get on. So most adults won't kill other adults. They won't murder adults. But it's not because it's ethical. It's not because there's a moral reason for that. They won't do that because they'll go to prison. There's a negative consequence to go to prison, or they don't find it very tasteful just to have to deal with blood and all that kind of stuff. There's no real ethical and moral consideration when they come to make these decisions. So if you could remove all of the negative consequences, you have this isolated incident out in the middle of nowhere. Let's say you're on the top of a cliff and you have the opportunity to push this person off a cliff, and there's no consequences. Okay, this person is, let's say that all their family's gone, they have no friends, they have no family, there's nobody around to see what happens, and all you got to do is push, and they'll fall off the cliff. Now, there's a lot of grown-up people who would be at least tempted just to do that, just to see what it would be like. And the reason I know that is because whenever I ask somebody, and I'm talking about a fairly large, obviously not scientifically large sample audience, but we're talking pretty much everyone I deal with in my personal relationships, in my personal life that I've dealt with. I've asked them, not everybody, but most, I've asked them, why is it that it's wrong to kill? Why would you not murder somebody? And nobody can give me a straight answer back. From an ethical position, they'd say, well, it's wrong. Or, well, it's, what does that mean? It's wrong. I mean, that's a really arbitrary statement of there's no content in there. That's just saying something's wrong. I mean, you can say anything's wrong. Why is it wrong? What's the reason? What is the reason? So they can't give it. No, that's not really the crux of my beef here. But I just wanted to kind of frame it in some context where adults don't make their decisions based on principle, based on virtue, or based on morality. What they do is they make their decisions based on everybody else. Now, they may not even know this. Okay, so they may not be aware of this, but you can prove it very, very easily. They don't know any better than you. Parents don't know better than you with most things. Okay, they're financially stable. They've been around longer. So they have this gift of mimicry and pretending and taking beliefs on board into their psyche in order to survive and be peaceful. Now, you can't be peaceful in this world. You can't get on in this world with everybody just totally happy, or at least for the most part, in this world, because this world is, and still maintain virtue and still maintain consistent principles with truth, because this world is so crazy. How everyone interacts in this world is so crazy that the only way for you to get on in it without constant arguments and conflict, or at least constantly biting your tongue and that frustration that you would get from just putting up with people's garbage all the time, is to abandon virtue and truth and principle, and instead make your decisions based on what works for everybody else. Okay, and just an example of this: if you consider criminals and just scumbags in general, right? Just people who not necessarily get arrested, but like just the people who take advantage and manipulate people. They have a better understanding than most peaceful people of what society is, what interaction with other people is. They know that nothing is going to harm them, no matter how they act. Okay, and this is pretty much a principle that sociopaths, psychopaths, they know how to push people's buttons and not get in trouble. Because, like, I just heard some stories on the news recently where this was in the same segment where a young girl was raped by this guy. She was, like less than 15 or something, and she was raped by this guy. And this guy gets, a 10-year suspended sentence. He's going to serve 2, something like that. So he gets 2 years paid vacation, right? In the same segment, this other businessman had falsified some documents to show how, something he was importing was actually, was it down as some kind of fruit, and it was some kind of vegetable because there's a different tax code, and he was able to save, a couple of thousand or something small like that by falsifying these documents. And he gets 20 years. So he gets 10 times a more severe sentence from defrauding money from the state, which isn't really defrauding because they're stealing the money anyway. And I don't think it's possible to really falsify paper. It's not a moral problem. I don't think there's any moral problem falsifying papers to a state because, it is illegal, of course. I'm not condoning illegal activity, but just as far as morality goes, it's not immoral because the state doesn't exist, right? So you can't falsify or have any kind of a contract with a fictitious entity. It'd be like me and my imaginary friend Thomas, and I say, "Hey Thomas, I'm a unicorn." There's nothing morally wrong with that. I might be nuts, but there's nothing morally wrong with it because it's fictitious. It's not real. So there can't be a contract with a fictitious entity. So this guy basically does nothing, and he gets 20 years in prison. Whereas this guy rapes a small girl, does irreparable damage to her. So, well, at least I'd imagine, she's never going to, her life is different now. Let's just say her life is going to be different now, no matter how much counseling she gets. I mean, she has to go through all sorts of therapy in order to readjust to, and have normal relationships with people. So, but the difference is this girl wasn't in the government. She's not part of the government. She's not some government official's daughter. Whereas this guy, this businessman, had taken money, in their mind, had taken money from them. So he had wronged them personally, right? So they're the crooks. That's where crooks operate. So this you can rape a girl and pretty much get away with it, right? Nothing bad's going to really. Now you might have there's still plenty of social stigma around it and that. But you don't care. I mean, you're already pretty messed up if you're going to do that kind of stuff. What do you care about social stigma? So, scumbags get away with stuff. And that's all the proof you need to show that society is being controlled by scumbags, by adults, by people who don't put principle and morality first. If adults put principle and morality first as a group of people, then those kind of situations would not arise in society. A guy wouldn't be getting prison time for falsifying documents and 10 times longer than a guy who rapes a kid. Now, this is something that really, really struck me, and it cut right into my gut when I realized this one. And it's a constant realization that I have when I'm with acquaintances or friends or even family. I get together with people, and I'm overtly aware all the time. I mean, I'm always uneasy. No matter how friendly and nice the atmosphere that they try to create is, and I'm not saying they're all bad people, but what I'm saying is I'm overtly aware that they all mean me harm. Now let me clarify what I mean by that. Because I don't believe in violence, okay? I don't believe in aggression. I don't believe in that. Like the only time, and I hate having to keep adding this disclaimer in, the only time that it's okay to use any kind of force is in response to a credible threat. Okay, that's the only time, and it has to be credible and it has to be legitimate. Like parents, they hit their kids to get them to obey commands. Now that's messed up, right? Because a child typically does not present a credible threat. And I was even thinking that if a child hits a parent, okay, there's like a 4 or 5 year old kid hits a parent, even then it's not okay to hit them back because they're not a credible threat, right? Because they're too small. You're a big adult, they're a small child. Now, okay, if the kid picked up a gun or something or a knife, then it would be okay to hit him, right? But that's highly unlikely situation. But all these people support violence against me for simple moral objection. Okay, so you present basic arguments about how non-aggressive interactions are the only things that are legitimate, right? And what happens is, when you present the basic arguments, a sane, rational person who's been subjected to a world of just craziness all the time, just, who supports, most people support taxation, they support, the prison system, they support the guards, they support armies, they support this kind of stuff. They support public school, compulsory education, they support all that stuff that's based on aggression, okay? But when you present them with an argument like, look, taxation is theft, here's why. If you don't pay it, there's this threat, like they're going to come after you for more money. If you still don't pay it, you go to prison, that you get kidnapped. So that is a system. Now, whatever you think about, if you think taxation is good or not, you have to admit that principally aggression is at the core of it. So the only way you would then be able to say taxation is okay is after listening to that argument would be to say that aggression is okay. It's okay to initiate aggression. And so if it's okay to initiate aggression, then what's to stop me right now from taking your stuff? Right? So there's nothing that makes the government more special as a group of individuals than any individual. A group can only express the rights and entitlements or whatever of the individual. So it's only ever as an extension. A group cannot get extra rights by the fact that there's so many more people. That's just a mob. That's silly. So if the government are able to do it, and you say that it's okay that they aggress on people, they threaten people, give me your money or you go to prison, then I get to do that. I get to say, give me your money or I'm putting you in a cage in my backyard. And of course they would go, oh wow, I never thought of that. At least I say, of course. Some people will recoil and go, wow, that, I never thought of that. And they might, they may not agree with you straight away, and they could just go, that's great, I'm going to have to think about that. And that's fine, that's okay. That's a normal human response. But typically what happens is you're met with, at least I'm met with, oh yeah, sure, but you just don't understand the state. I mean, what about all the criminals? What about all this kind of stuff? And I'm just, well, which is it? Is it wrong to be a criminal and aggressive, in which case it's wrong to be the state and aggressive? Or is it wrong to be a criminal? Are you saying it's wrong to be a criminal, but okay to be a criminal in this case? If you're democratically elected, it's okay to steal from people. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? So there's something broken there if there's no recoil. And those are the same people who they say, they can say they're your friend, they can say they love you, they can say all sorts of stuff. But if they hold that position, that means that by me having a moral objection to something, they would support me going to prison. Somebody aggressing against me, taking my money and sending me to prison. Okay, and that's why I am constantly uneasy in these environments. Okay, now that's just one argument. That's just taxation. I mean, there's so many others that they would still agree with, like compulsory education, putting small children into prison. That's what it is. That's what compulsory education is. I mean, they can't leave, right? So virtuous, good people are at a severe disadvantage in that they're scorned by even their friends, right? Even their friends, they say, oh, that's the nutbag, he's the hippie or whatever. I just believe in principles and ethics, and grown-ups don't. Okay, so these are the grown-ups. This is the majority of the grown-ups, and we know that this is the majority of the grown-ups because look at the world that we have. It's framed by these grown-ups. Okay, we have huge debt. Now that's not normal. That's not a normal thing for any group of individuals to do. Because you look at children don't do that. Children don't get themselves in debt. Children can't get themselves in debt because they don't have anybody they can pick on who will end up picking up the tab. Because they're the smallest, they're the weakest in society. The children are the weakest right now. It used to be, there was, women used to be down there with where children are now. Black people used to be there with slavery just in recent history. And at the time of slavery, it was not readily apparent to the dominant white people, right? People who were in higher society, people who ran society, the grown-ups of society, right? It was not readily available to them mentally that this is what we're doing is wrong, because they actually had practical arguments, right? They would actually say stuff. If somebody went to them and said, slavery is wrong, here's why, right? That's a person. If it's okay for you to do this to them, why is it not okay for somebody to do that to you? Or whatever. So many arguments against slavery. It's such a no-brainer today. But what they had a response to that at the time. And they would say, well, if I just let my slaves go, then, they don't have any money to go to the doctor. They won't go to the dentist. They won't have a job. The only skills they have are working on my farm. And it was true. I mean, this was all true. But that's not a moral argument. I mean, because that's just a practical argument for, in the moment benefits. But there's no argument from virtue there. Like, sure, you can get them to a dentist, but like a rapist could buy his victim a bunch of flowers before he rapes her. That's not an argument. You're still aggressing upon someone. And that's something we can make now. And of course, we did the same thing with women. When it was okay to beat women around the house, to keep them locked up in the kitchen, when it was okay to, they couldn't do anything, they couldn't leave the home, and still parts of the world where that's how it is. It's not readily available that this is wrong because they have these arguments given to them where, the adults have these arguments, the people who are directing society. In this case, it was just men in general, typically, wealthier men who had, women are irrational. They need to be kept in line because they'll hurt themselves if they're left off, do whatever they want. They're flighty and emotional and, we have to protect them and this is how we protect them. And it's abuse. Like, it's just, and we know that now. We can look at that and go, so it's not a big deal to talk about women's rights now. It's not a big deal to say I'm against slavery. It's no big deal to say that today. It was a big deal back then. So similarly, we have to look at children now. Children are now the weakest in our society, in our environment. And it's not readily available to people that the aggression that is being done to children is not morally defensible. And even though there are arguments for it, okay, so children are just irrational. They don't know yet. They need to be commanded. They need to be hit. They need to be yelled. Now, I know a lot of people are moving away from the whole hitting thing. But even just the commands, do as I say, this kind of stuff is quite normal in society. Or even just, like, even if you did away with all that, just look at the debt. Okay, the only way that people are able to spend the money that they don't have today on healthcare and bailing out banks and all that is simply because there are children. If there weren't children to pay that, we wouldn't be able to do that. So the whole assumption is that these kids are going to be able to pay it from their taxes when they get old enough. And that's a major problem from a moral standpoint. And we can say, yeah, we're doing it now so we build up the country, and then when they get old enough, they'll have this wonderful planet that they're going to be able. But that's not what we're doing. We're stealing. We're just stealing from them. It's morally reprehensible. It's not okay how we look at children. So the grown-ups are absolutely insane. And here's the easiest way of putting it. Parents are really overprivileged siblings. They're not authority figures, okay? At least what a normal authority figure is to be, right? So a parent is supposed to be. This is what a parent is supposed to be. Just someone who's there to nurture, to encourage, just all around love their children. That's what they're there for. That's what a normal authority figure is for. They're not there to command them. They're not there to spank them or hit them or do all this just stuff that you wouldn't do when they get bigger. And we know parents stop doing it when they get bigger. It's not because they stop being irrational. They still act out irrationally, but they're bigger now, so they can hit you back, right? So they're no longer in the place of slaves 200 years ago or women 50 years ago. Now they're becoming adults themselves and getting closer to that position. So you can't shove them around anymore, right? At least not like you used to when they were small creatures. You have to get sneakier and use emotional tactics. Parents are today overprivileged siblings. They're just bigger and cleverer than their children. So they're able to push them around. And they have all these arguments why they're doing this to their children, why they're able to command them. They don't know better. The same arguments that was made for slaves and women. They don't know any better, right? That's not how you teach them. You don't teach people by commanding them. You teach people by nurturing and encouraging and explaining and expounding and showing. That's the correct role of a parent. But so by that definition, we don't have parents today, really. Again, there's exceptions. There are people who do it right. People who, do actually spend more time researching before they have children on, how to raise children than they do for, which phone am I going to get next or what car. People really, for the most part, they spend more time researching which car to get than what is the best. And I'm not just talking, people do spend time learning about, the food and the budget and all that kind of stuff. But that's just self-interest. I mean, that's nothing to do with the kid. What's best for the child? And this information is readily available, how to parent correctly. But they don't do that. They're just going to get by the way they were raised. It's very, very difficult to break out of that. Because it works. And it does work. I mean, slavery worked, right? Beating women worked. But what was the objective? Just to have an easy life. That's not supposed to be an objective in, it's not a bad objective to have, but you have to make it consistent with morality. And it wasn't consistent with morality. Slavery is not consistent with morality. Beating women and keeping women suppressed is not consistent with morality, and suppressing children is not consistent with morality because they're people. You wouldn't do it to somebody your age. You wouldn't do it to somebody older than you. Why are you doing it to somebody younger? Because they're smaller and they can't vote and they can't hit you back. And when they do, you'll probably stop. So my message to youth is don't accept that adults, that the grown-ups know what they're talking about, okay? What they have is the gift of mimicry. What they have is not morality. It's not virtue, and they don't know what's best for you. Now, they're more financially stable. They do have more wisdom in how to deal with situations that crop up, obviously, because they've been around long enough. But they can't teach you long-lasting principles, for the most part, because they don't have them. They don't have the morality. They don't have the ideas of non-aggression. They don't have the principles of, why is it wrong to steal from people? Because they steal from people all the time. Okay, so they would say it's wrong for people to steal, but what they really mean is it's wrong for everyone else to steal from me. While they happily receive welfare from all their neighbors, they happily support the government stealing for their benefit. Because when you do the math, the individual always comes off much better in this kind of a system, right? So if I'm a grown-up and I think nobody should ever steal, except for, taxation. Taxation is okay. So the government are going to steal from everybody equally, including me, right? So, but look at what I now have access to. So if the government steals from me 10 grand a year, but they steal from everybody else 10 grand a year, then I can tap into that pool. I can give up the 10 grand a year, but look what I can get. I can get 20, 30, 40, 50 grand from this pool if I can manipulate the system. If ever I need it, the system is there for me, right? So it's never in the individual's interest to fight against an immoral system like this, unless they submit themselves to morality and principle. If it's about survival or it's about some kind of, material benefit, then you will never, if that's what your life is about and that's how you make decisions, then you will never oppose the state. You'll never oppose violence in that sense. The only time you'll ever oppose violence is when it removes wealth from you. And this is why the state is also, the same person who taxes is also the same person who prosecutes others who do the same thing. Because if, you can't have competing governments, right? Because, the government would lose out. That central monopoly, the whole purpose of a central monopoly is to be able to be the only one who takes the money, right? The only one who dishes out law. And this is why grown-ups all support the state. And this is further proof that as a group, they're entirely immoral. And because this is the group who is directing society, the youth then learn from them and are subject to their ideas of reality. Sadly, what happens most youth is they take on board the characteristics that their parents project onto them, but it's their parents' characteristics that they're interpreting, right? Because inherently, children are a threat to the old order. Every child is a threat to the order that came before them, because every child is born into a more advanced system, at least theoretically. So every child has this fresh slate, a clean slate to start from, and they're able to build all their principles from scratch. They're always a threat to adults. Because, I mean, look, you give a kid an iPad, and they just pick it up in a couple of minutes. They're able to work the whole thing. I mean, these kids could run tech centers by the age of 12. Now, what adults today and parents today do you know could do that kind of stuff? You know, of course, there are lots, but for the most part, parents today, folks over 30, 40, 50, are completely technologically illiterate. So these kids would cream them in the marketplace. And this is why they're shoveled into schools. It's very, very beneficial for adults, for the adult class. It's a class. It's not it's a class of older siblings, not parents. Like education itself, public education, compulsory education is the ultimate Rube Goldberg machine. Rube Goldberg machine. I don't know if you ever saw the show Elementary, or there was a car ad a few years back where it's just this ridiculously complex system that is there to it just goes all the way around the room. A lot of books fall, and it knocks a mallet that swings on a string that hits a bowling ball that hits a roll of dominoes, and then at the very end it's just it's a lighter and it lights a candle or something. It's the simplest task in the world, but you have this huge machine that's built, and it's the Rube Goldberg machine it's kind of like the joke. It's a joke machine. It's funny. Because why in the world would you create such a complex system to solve such a simple task? Well, the reason that you would send kids into a school system and spend 12 years, 16 years, 20 years in education is to keep them out of the marketplace. And we call it education. It's not education. It's nothing to do with education. It's just to keep them out of the marketplace, keep them out of your hair, so that you can go to work. That's what parents want. And these teachers, so-called, and these parents project their fears into the child, their flaws into the child. When they see a child acting up in class, it's because there's something wrong with the child. It's not because the class is absolutely the most boring place they've ever been in their life, and you're trying to get them to sit there and listen to, this loser just go on and on from these textbooks that are outdated and non-verified scientifically, and just stupid crap, making up subjects. What does a kid care about? A whole subject of geography dedicated for... If a kid wants to study geography, he can study geography. He doesn't need to be forced. You don't need to force every child to study this stuff. Every child taking, 12 subjects. It's insane. It's just the stupidest thing you can do. Stupid waste of time. These kids could be really, really productive. And the problem is, these kids come out of school, they can't even sweep a floor. Like, they're not even good enough for minimum wage employment. They can't even clean a window, let alone think independently and think virtuously. And if I could get even more cynical, this is why adults like to show children movies about overcoming adversity in this particular way, where you have this entire movie framed around all these objectives that you need to overcome, but at the end there's going to be this happy ending. What they're really showing is, no matter how much crap we put you through, put up with it, and there'll be a happy ending. There's light at the end of the tunnel. But you have to go through this horrendous initiation in the world in order to earn your place as an adult. Because that's what they went through, so they just think that that's normal. Well, there isn't light at the end of the tunnel. Unless you consider that light at the end of the tunnel being you get on in society by submitting to individuals and people's own whims rather than principle and morality. Study logic, study reason, study ethics. Determine principles for yourself. Determine why things are right and why things are wrong. And don't act out aggressively like your parents do to you. If you want an example of why ethics are taught conveniently by parents, because parents understand to a large degree the correct ethics. They just don't live by them. They think it's a convenient tool. And the reason I know that is kids in preschool are taught, share your stuff, be nice, don't hit each other, have a break and have some milk and cookies. I mean, and all sit together as friends. This is all stuff that keeps everybody peaceful and happy. Now, the reason they do that in preschool is because that's the best way of coordinating small children without them, acting out what they get at home, which is commanding and beating and telling people what to do and taking stuff. That's what parents do. Parents take stuff from their kids. Now, I'm not saying parents don't love their kids. What I'm saying is they aren't capable of expressing true love as it's supposed to be between a parent and a child. They're only capable of this kind of emotional love that every now and then they see their kid doing something completely unexpected, and they're like, oh wow, that is just so cool. And it snaps them out of this aggressive, destructive, violent mindset that they pick up from this world. But it's fleeting, and it's not really what their relationship is based on. Their relationship is based on, child, you are an inconvenience 80% of the time, and I've developed this system of keeping you compliant. And it really does work. I mean, it's not like it doesn't work. That's why it's there. It has a practical reason. When you yell at a kid, when you command a kid, when you send a kid to its room for not doing this or not doing that, you listen to me, it does work. It's immediate. There's an immediate compliance, but what you're developing in the child is eventually, and it will manifest as chronic disobedience and unhealthy relationship with authority. It's just a matter of fact. But what works outside of the home is different, because you're dealing with so many different children and different parents' children, where violence really isn't a very smart solution. So ethics has to be taught to children at a very early age to get them to be able to sit together in somewhere like preschool. But when you become an adult, you can throw all that stuff out. You can steal from your friends. Okay, you don't go into your next door neighbor's house and you take their stuff, because you don't have the guts. You get the government to do it. You get the government to take from people who have created so much wealth, and you say, well, that's some of that wealth belongs to me. Of course it doesn't. But grown-ups steal from each other, and they steal from their kids, and that's what they do, and they think that's normal. So they throw out the idea that violence is. I mean, could you imagine it? What if at 3:00 every day, all these government leaders had milk and cookies together and their blankies, at 3:00, and they just all lie down for 10 minutes, and they didn't. They respected the same rules that you get in preschool. They don't hit each other. They put stuff back where they find it. They don't aggress. They're not violent. In preschool, even kids, they hold hands. This is stuff that if you had these, politicians and grown-ups, just grown-ups in general, if they even tried this kind of stuff, what kind of a world we'd live in. I mean, it's amazing. I'm not suggesting that we all go out and get milk and cookies every day at 3:00, but it wouldn't hurt to give it a shot as a solution to the problems in this world. It's a good start. So in closing, just realize that the teachers in your school, the grown-ups in your life, all the people around you, they're all nuts. They're all mad. So love them, but don't listen to them unless you can verify what they're saying. And, you pretty much all have smartphones now, so you can Google everything. It's great. I mean, parents can't get away with what they could before. And grown-ups couldn't get away with what they could before. So just realize that there is no point when all of a sudden you know everything. And so just by being 40 or 50 years of age, you're like this super genius. The facts are, if you've gotten to that age and you're any sort of successful, you're probably a morally inconsistent, perhaps even sociopathic person. Thanks for listening. Head over to counterintuition.com. There's loads more podcasts, videos, and articles. And do please comment and share this, this video. I'd like to get a conversation going. If I've offended anybody, I'd love to hear from you. If I've struck a chord with anybody and you like this, I'd love to hear from you too. So have a lovely day.